potvrđeno.
Ovo je naš posao koji se nikada ne zaustavlja. Radoznali,
Odgovorni,
tačni. Mi smo Tanjug.
80 godina sa vama.
Tanjug aplikacija. Prvi saznajte najtačnije informacije. Besplatno na Google i App Store-u.
Od sada i Tanjug TV na Telebox aplikaciji. Besplatno. Gledajte šta želite, kada želite i gde želite. K1, Kazbuka, TV Doktor i Tanjug TV na Telebox aplikaciji. Dostupno na Google Playu i na Apple Store-u.
Ovo je Tanjug.
Ušli smo upravo u 10. sat današnjih razgovora.
Ovo su trenuci koji mogu da vam promene život.
Ovo su lica kojima verujete.
Dobro jutro, Tanjug.
Ovo je iskustvo.
I kada je lepo,
Šta za vas predstavlja jedan trenutak?
I kada je teško,
tačno na mestu.
Evo sada mi javlja da je Tanju upravo potvrđeno.
ovo je naš posao koji se nikada ne zaustavlja. Radoznali,
odgovorni,
tačni. Mi smo Tanjug.
80 godina sa vama.
Tanjug aplikacija. Prvi saznajte najtačnije informacije. Besplatno na Google i App Store-u.
Od sada i Tanjug TV na Telebox aplikaciji. Besplatno. Gledajte šta želite, kada želite i gde želite. K1, Kazbuka, TV Doktor i Tanjug TV na Telebox aplikaciji. Dostupno na Google Playu i na Apple Store-u.
Broj 6, na kome će se raspravljati o pitanjima budućeg razvoja Evropske unije i procesu pridruživanja zemalja Zapadnog Balkana. Molim moderatori i paneliste da se pripreme i posjećam vas na agendu da se u forum sali, dakle paralelno, odvija i panel posvećen digitalnoj industriji.
Zamolit ćemo sve goste da sednu, uskoro počinjemo sa sledećim panelom. Hvala vam.
Tara is around. Be nice if it. All right, all right. All right, fine. Okay. Hello, everybody. Take your seats, please. All right, let's start this panel and look at because we are running late, so let's try to be as efficient as we can. First of all, let me say that we are having this panel enlargement after a long time. In the beginning, when we started this panel, there was talk about this, and then finally I decided that we should shift our attention to other things, geopolitical aspects of and problems of the European Union and et cetera, because actually during those first panels all we heard was talk about great progress and reform, and basically nothing was happening. So we shifted this, but then again, because enlargement became a hot topic again after the Ukraine and Moldova got candidacy status and things of that nature, we decided that again in this forum we'll talk about enlargement in the Western Balkans and Serbia, and the title is adjusted that way as can we make it till 2030. Our guests today are well known to all of you, except for a few, and I will not, obviously we have Minister Miščević here for European integration from the government, Ambassador Hill, Ambassador of the United States, as you well know, Ambassador Giuffre of the European Union, and we have Nicola Pontara, who is the Chief the country manager of the World Bank here for Serbia. And the only person I think needs some little more introduction is Srđan Cvijić, who has vast experience working for the Open Society Fund, working for the policy think tanks in the European Union, working for the Vienna Institute as a fellow for human sciences, and is the president of the International Advisory Committee of the Belgrade Security Policy. Belgrade Center for Security Policy, sorry, of course, and that is is in that role here. He has a PhD in law, a doctorate in law from the University of Florence. So before we start, we've conceived this panel as consisting of two related subjects. One is perceptions of EU enlargement, perceptions of Serbia, perceptions of the EU, basically how we see each other and where we are in terms of enlargement. And number two, and I would like the panelists to restrict themselves to maybe a few, 2 or 3 priorities or what they see as the impediments, the largest impediments to EU integration. But since we're talking about perceptions, and I will not go and give a lengthy little introduction to this, you here obviously are a well-educated, informed audience. So I'm going to interview you in with a couple of questions. How many of you think Serbia should be a member of the European Union? Raise your hand, please. Okay. Against, not that many, I would assume. Anybody against it? No. Good. Now, how many of you think that since we got candidacy, Serbia's government is really committed to Europe integration? Please raise your hand. Not that many. How many of you think it is not committed that strongly to the European integration? All right, thank you. On the other side of the coin, how many of you think the European Union, meaning Brussels, is really committed to integrating Serbia since the beginning of negotiations for candidacy? Okay, how many think, I don't see that many hands, how many think it is not that committed to Serbian integration? Okay, thank you. All right, that's a quick review on perceptions. So I think we need to address these issues, and then, but let me also further this little interview with you in the following sense. We hear a lot since the invasion of the Ukraine how committed the European Union is to democracy, rule of law, values of that nature, and how it puts this in the forefront when it talks about the solidarity with Ukraine against the Russian aggression. Now, in terms of these values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights, how many of you think that the European Union, meaning the Commission, is really concerned about these issues when it comes to Serbia? Raise your hand. How many of you think it is not committed enough in this respect? Okay. Thank you. Well, I'm going to leave the United States out of it, but I think the result will probably be the same or worse. Given that we are on the candidacy to become a member of the European Union, not a candidate to become a member of the United States, of the following states. So, given these this little quick result of the reaction of the public here, let's talk about this some more. Now, let's put some facts on the ground. The first is that if you look at candidacy and we look at the reports of the European Commission on Serbia's advancement, and we put numbers on all the little chapters that are now in the clusters, and we put a little number to them, a grade, and the grades go between 1 and 5, you will see that Serbia is basically moving extremely slowly or not at all since 2015. It's at around 3, and it's around 3.2 or 3, or 0.2 or 3 last year. So this is just judging from the European Commission's reports. So my first question, and of course I will give first the floor to the highest ranking member of the here, and that is the Minister for European Integration. So maybe Tanya can tell us why is this the case, and what she sees as these perceptions, and how does the Serbian government perceive the process with EU integration, and how this perceives Brussels concerning this, and not just how it is moving on its own reform.
First, thank you very much for inviting me. And yes, I remember the time when we had the last panel of this type. It was well before Corona. So I am glad to, dear colleagues and friends from the Economic Council or the Society Association, to again have a perception that the EU path of Serbia matters. Because not including panel of this with this topic showed a lot that the most prestigious conference did not pay attention on what is going on in the European process, especially for Serbia. But let me use the opportunity to also step out of my role of being minister, which is a temporary job, but to use my other and the primary job, and that means to be the professor, and actually to explain some of the issues. Well, I know that it's catchy to have the assessments in terms of 1 to 5, but you might ask also Ambassador Geoffrey, there are no numbers from 1 to 5 when assessing anybody. Because it's very difficult to assess something with the numbers of 1 to 5 when there is actually 6 level of assessment in that respect. So that might say something regarding the assessment that people are doing and assessing us not so well. The second important thing, but please be aware, we are all reading very carefully the annual report. What we are doing right now is that we are trying to improve the developments in each and every area, in each and every recommendation that came out of the report. So I am not neglecting the importance of the report, but I would really like to show what are the differences for the country which is 23 years in the integration process and for 10 years negotiating membership. And the most important things that we have to prove are the track records. So the number of cases, which gives a new level of assessment, and it's not part of the annual report. So you are assessing new trio, which are adopting the laws, with providing a track record, which is for the countries which are negotiating membership. So why I'm saying that? Because we have to sit and discuss with the European Commission to recalibrate the assessment, to have a proper assessment of the development. And the third thing, which was very noticeable here, is the rule of law. So European Union, European Commission, the member states, but I will also include here US, did not give up out of the rule of law. Quite contrary. We are raising the bar now because together with our 3 neighboring countries, Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia will be part of the rule of law report, like any other 27 member states, which is a huge possibility for us to see where are we, but also to learn from others. So the rule of law is not neglected, could not be neglected. The new reality, as Sinisha called that, or so many crises that we are facing with, is not going to turn back the eye from the rule of law, neither from the Commission but also from all of us, that we have to deal with that.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Now, Ambassador Giuffre, you're usually first because I call you as the highest common denominator of the European Union, so please tell us about your perceptions of this whole process and why, what you see as the problem of perception.
Well, thank you for the question, for the invitation, Ivan. Great to be back in Copenhagen for the Business Forum. And thanks for your little survey at the beginning of the session that I think fits in with many of the polls that we're conducting. And obviously, the issue of perception is important, but perception is always based on the past. Why policy making has to be based on what is happening now and the direction we want to go to the future. And this is the difference, the gap that we have to bridge here. And certainly the reality today is that, as we discussed last year, we are entering to a new world after February 24th, 2022, and enlargement is back on the top of the European Union agenda. This is a reality that we have to remember. We should not insist enough on this very key historical fact. And within the European Union, the debate on how to prepare to accommodate an EU with 30 member states has started, and we're looking at what policy areas we need to adapt. And in addition, we have come up with an initiative, a growth plan, which is there to reignite the enlargement engine that was stuttering. And now we have to go faster, quicker, and more intensively. As Tanya was saying, the fundamentals remain essential. So the issue of the rule of law, the fight against corruption, the fight against organized crime, the independence of the judiciary, the good functioning of democratic institutions remain at the center, and indeed Serbia will be treated as a member state with the rule of law report, and my colleagues are busy working, preparing the reports. There will be a meeting in a few days in Serbia, the rule of law subcommittee discussing all these issues, so soon we'll have a document where Serbia will be assessed as we assess all member states, and this is something we didn't have last year. Now, the other things that will need to be done, it's always the same, so fundamentals, rule of law, the pace of normalization with Kosovo. This is also a key aspect that determines the pace of the negotiations. We have an agreement reached last year, 27th of February, followed by the already agreement in March 2023. Unfortunately, we haven't seen much implementation, so we need to work on this. And then let me say a few words about the economy, because after all, we have a business forum. And here I have to say that Serbia has done quite a few things in the past years. I think we have to recognize, and we heard just before this panel the IMF presenting the results that are quite positive. We've seen a number of important reforms that have been noted by, of course, international institutions, but also by the private sector, that has spurred important investment in the country. We saw an acceleration of public investment after many years of underinvestment. We've seen improvement in the digital sector, steps to reform SOEs, and a stronger focus on renewable. But the question is, if we look at the convergence between the Western Balkans and the EU, and we looked at the OECD data, we see that if we follow this rhythm, the convergence will happen, I think, in 2074, so half a century. Serbia's GDP per capita is still 44% of the average GDP per capita in the European Union. So obviously we need to do more. Economy is part of the whole story, and we need to accelerate growth and convergence, and this is where the growth plan comes into play. So I would say that the key issue here is to take all this block of important issues reforms on the fundamentals, normalization, foreign policy, economic growth, and put them in a context where the enlargement has become again a key priority for the European Union, and to see this as an opportunity which cannot be missed.
Okay, thank you. Now, just one question, Ambassador Giuffre. You mentioned the growth plan, and I don't want, that's not really the subject, but since you mentioned it, and I'm sorry, you know, there's seems to be certain problems with that coming up. For example, it's all for the Western Balkans, but for example, Kosovo, as I remember, is still under sanctions by the Commission, if I could gather that. Secondly, in the European Parliament, just this month, there was a resolution concerning the Growth Pact that said that sanctions on Russia should be, or convergence with the foreign should be some kind of, well, condition or not condition, but it's there as an important element of having the plan growth forward. So you see these as real substantial problems for the growth plan kicking off or not?
Look, I think the growth plan will happen. We're going very fast in setting down the rules and the resources in order this to happen.
Do you think
a year ago we were here, the growth plan was not known, it was not designed. Now we have it, we already set aside the funds, we set aside areas for integrations of the Western Balkans into single market. The discussions on the regulation that will govern the new financial instrument is still ongoing. Of course there are issues. There's the issue of foreign policy, there's the issue of the fundamentals, there is the issues of how to govern this instrument. This is part of a democratic debate that we have within the European Union, and 27 member states have the right to have their own opinion, and they have the right to push their own interest. The European Parliament will have its own opinion. It's part of the democratic process within the European Union. But the fundamental underlying reality is that this exists because both the Parliament, the Council and the Commission believe that we need to relaunch the enlargement process.
Okay.
This is the
Fine.
initiative.
You made your point. In other words, this might be problems or not? Yes. The answer is yes, this will be under discussion further, how the growth plan moves forward. Yeah, okay. Now, since we talked about growth, let's go to the World Bank and talk about, there's been a lot, this morning there's been a lot of talk about convergence and stuff, and I myself had dabbled some studies with that, and frankly speaking, there doesn't seem to reach too much hope that this will really take off very quickly. So, you know, with extra efforts on all kinds of fronts, maybe the growth rate will go a little up, but actually this whole West Balkans place is still sort of a backwater of Europe concerning the level of the economy. I mean, GDP per capita income at least. So please, Mr. Pontara, will you take the floor?
Thanks, Ivan, and I'm very happy to be here in Kopaonik. We did some research on convergence of the Western Balkans with the EU. We looked in particular at two groups of countries. One is the new member states, and then the EU 17, which are the most developed part of the EU. And perhaps it might be useful for me to put down 2 or 3 points. The first one is that if we look at the past, we saw that there has been some convergence. In other words, if you look at the period between 1991 and 2023, the Western Balkans have grown faster than the EU 17. It's something that you would expect because they come from much lower level of developments. And the golden growth period for the Western Balkans was in fact those years, as we heard before, before the financial crisis of 2008. So between 2000 and 2008, where the Western Balkans grew at an average rate of around 5%. The trouble with that is that if you look at the new member states between 1991 and 2008, they grew even faster on average in the Western Balkans. So what does that mean? It means that, and this is the second point, that if we look at the average real GDP per capita of today, we see that the new member states, as Emanuele was saying, have an average, they reach the 60% of the average of the real GDP per capita of the EU, while the Western Balkans remain at the 30% on average. Serbia might be a little bit higher, but on average 30% of the average real GDP per capita of the EU. So this is when we look at the past. then let's look at the future and project out some projections. Then if the growth of the Western Balkans would attain the growth that they achieved during the golden growth period between 2000 and 2008, then these countries will converge with the EU average living standards, and we're talking about the EU 27 now, which is, the bar is a bit lower than the EU 17, in 20 years. So in 2045, at 5% per annum on average. If there, on the other hand, we take the growth rate between 2001 and 2021, so even after the golden growth period, then they will take 40 years to converge. If we take the average growth rate after the financial crisis to today, then they will converge in 70 years. And this is also bear out by the evidence of the new report published by the EBRD just a few days ago. So the question is, this brings really home the importance to increase the growth rate of these countries. And this morning we heard several ways in which we can do so. But how do we do that? And that's my third point. And one clue on how to increase the growth in this country is to look at the nature, the quality of the growth that's taken place in the last 3 decades. And when we decompose growth along the axis of labor, capital, and total factor productivity, we saw that in these countries the contribution of labor has been lower than in the new member states and the more advanced European countries, which underscores the importance on investing in human capital. You can look at growth in different ways by decomposing it along the axis of investment, consumption, and net exports, and there you see that growth in these countries in the Western Balkans has been mainly driven by consumption rather than investment. So again, here there is a clue that is given to policymakers to ways in which you can increase the rate of investment in this economy. In particular, as Alexander Vlahovic was saying this morning, the rate of domestic private investment, not only foreign direct investment. And the third thing, that if you look at the growth rates of these countries, again, Western Balkans, new member states, and EU17, is the fact that there is still a huge gap in terms of the quality of the institution, as Manuela was saying. And I conclude, I guess now we are in inflection points. There is much bigger political will on the enlargement front. The EU has come up with the new growth plan for the Western Balkans, and it's of fundamental importance that IFIs, the EU, the government come together and think through what sort of structural reforms package will really bring the growth of the Western Balkans, of Serbia in particular, for the average of 2 to 3% that we've seen, to average of 5 and 6%. Let me stop here.
Thank you. Well, before I give the floor to Ambassador Hill, who speak for the U.S. position on this whole issue of enlargement, I was reminded by Ambassador Giuffre about the past and the future. I'll quote a great American author, William Faulkner, who said, "The past is not dead, it's not even the past." So, Ambassador Hill, you know, the United States is generally very supportive of your enlargement. Cynics like maybe me will say it's easy for you to be magnanimous about enlargement for clubs that you don't belong to, and tell others how great it would be to take them more members. But it is part of the general, it was sort of part of the general concept or doctrine, if I may say, concerning Europe, of Europe whole, free, and at peace. And so in Serbia and the Western Balkans fit in this block. What do you think are the major impediments here, and how do you see this whole process between the European Union and Serbia or the Western Balkans going forward?
Oh, there we go. There's an example of U.S.-EU cooperation. Yeah. Anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity to come to this forum. This is truly one of the premier events in Serbia, and the opportunity to address really people in the know is a great privilege. Let me say one thing at the outset. It's not that the U.S. likes to invite everyone to every other club that we're not involved in. There's an element of that. But, I mean, I must tell you, those Americans who've worked on Atlantic issues are truly inspired by what the European Union has done. I mean, if you go back through centuries, this is probably the most exciting political, economic, social, security organization that has ever been attempted in Europe. It's not easy. And so I think it's important for Americans not so much to give advice to the European Union, but rather to give support to what they're doing. It seems that to some extent what is happening is you go through tranches of membership, and it seems that, you know, like a video game or something, each time you reach another tranche there are new difficulties encountered, difficulties that were not there in the penultimate tranche of members. So there's no question this is going to be difficult when we talk about the Western Balkans and maybe even east of the Western Balkans. But I think at the same time, it's the road is open. I think all of us agree there's some new momentum to this. You know, for a while we all thought this road to European enlargement was closed for permanent repair. It's not closed for permanent repair. It's now open. And so when you look at Serbia, Serbia is on that road, wants to be on that road. I mean, not just the hands in the room tell you that. This is where Serbia belongs. But Serbia also comes to the European Union with its own personality. And my own view is Serbia's personality, which is involved having relationships with a lot of different countries, that many countries in Western Europe have not had those relationships, that really Serbia can bring something to the table in terms of being somewhat different in that regard. But at the same time, when you're talking about a club, any club, that club needs to be ensured that the new members serve the values, the interests of the overall club. And so that is a fair question. And the whole issue of alignment, a word I've really gotten tired of hearing, is nonetheless, you know, an important consideration. So I think as the European Union has expanded from the original concept of being more economic than anything else, but now sometimes being more anything else than economic. I mean, it's a whole host of issues that need to be looked at. I think it's fair to have this discussion with Serbia and to go in deeply to some of these issues that suggest a different drummer that Serbia may be marching to. I would argue that with respect to foreign policy, you know, no question, we would all like to see Serbia adopt the same sanctions that everyone else has on Russia. I got it. I think we all have that. But at the same time, I also think it is worth looking at the fact that Serbia is doing good things for Ukraine. Some of those things we talk about, some of those things we don't talk about. When you look at the fact that the Serbian president has met the Ukrainian president some 4 times in the last 10 months, these are meaningful encounters. When you look at the fact that the Serbian Chamber of Commerce took the step to invite the Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce to discuss and ultimately to sign memoranda of understanding dealing with the eventual reconstruction of Ukraine, these are important steps. And while they are not specific steps on the alignment process, people ought to think about the fact that Serbia is trying to do some things, sometimes in its own way, but sometimes better than some other people are doing things. So again, the need to embrace a concept of pluralism. Finally, I'd just like to say, even people who love Serbia don't necessarily love all the problems that Serbia may have in the region. This is why I think it's been very important for Serbia to have taken the leadership in something called Open Balkans, which is, after all, a regional integration concept. It's a concept where They establish patterns of cooperation such that when they enter the European Union, those patterns of cooperation endure and don't turn into problems that used to be outside the European Union, now dragged into the European Union. I think those are positive developments. I think there's a legacy of problems in the Balkans such that when Serbia suggests some regional integration, some people think, aha, there's Serboslavia coming up. So Serbia has to do this in a very careful, diplomatic way. I think that's important. Finally, I'd like to say, with respect to some of the political considerations, including the internal political considerations in Serbia, when you look at the, as I mentioned earlier, the tranche of issues where new memberships require new challenges, there is no question that we live in an era which is really, really challenged by things that we thought were answered some years before. Remember, we used to talk about the end of history, democracy is obviously the solution. Well, we're living in an era where people everywhere, not just in Serbia, but also in the United States, everywhere, have taken a kind of dimmer view of their civil organizations, have taken a dimmer view of some of their institutions. And when people start taking a skeptical view of their institutions, they often lapse back into previous institutions, which in my view are far less inspiring and far less capable of taking the country forward. It's a challenge. It's not something that can't be dealt with. It's a challenge, and I think people need to recognize it. And finally, I think it's very important. I mentioned, I think Serbia shares many of the same membership attributes. And one thing that Serbia is doing a good job of, we don't talk about it as much, but they're doing a good job of resecuring energy security and going after green energy. It is true they've really pushed on the solar energy. There's a very big tender coming out. They're pushing on more hydro, on use of rivers for energy. It's very clear that one of the big challenges here domestically is what to do with the local power company, how to manage that. This isn't easy in any country, but Serbia is addressing it with a way to try to get to a greener future. And I think that's also something worth taking account to.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's go back to some of the issues of enlargement, and I will give the floor to Srđan Cvić, who comes from the civil sector. Civil sector has a somewhat different, I think, view of some of the major problems that are being addressed in the enlargement process, but maybe I'm wrong. So, Srđan, please take the floor.
Well, actually, your opinion poll told me that not so much, actually. Yeah, it's a bit hard because I have the tendency to look at you as well. Yeah, so thanks for your question, Ivan. Well, your question at the beginning directed to the public showed me that actually we don't see things so much differently, really. And I think you asked at the beginning, what are the three main obstacles standing on Serbia's road towards EU membership? And I would single out three, really. Rule of law and democracy primarily, alignment with the EU's common foreign and security policy, and normalization of relations with Kosovo. So all the issues that have been mentioned already. And I think I want to emphasize here that we are not talking about the bureaucratic box-ticking exercise of chapters and clusters here, because yes, we can talk about grades. We also do it, my organization in a coalition with others called Preugur. We do it on a yearly basis, and yes, it more or less corresponds to what you have said, Ivan. But I think here we're talking about the fact that the current Serbian regime does not share really the same values on which the European Union was built. I think this is the fundamental problem, and I'll try to explain that. So first, democracy and rule of law. So ever since 2012, with each day passing by, Serbia backtracked on all the democratic advances achieved in the period from 2000 to 2012. We just saw the most recent Freedom House, Freedom in the World report that showed that Serbia had the most dramatic decline in these democratic standards in the entire continent. And now the fraudulent elections of 17th of December presented the culmination of this, really. We saw the ODIHR's report on the elections that was published a week ago, and it has been the most critical since 2012. The December 2023 joint statement by High Representative Josep Borrell and the Enlargement and Neighborhood Commissioner on the parliamentary elections is very clear for those who want to understand it. The European Parliament's resolution adopted by the unprecedented majority stating that the Serbian elections fell below the expected standards for an EU candidate country says it clearly that after 17th of December, Serbia does not fulfill the most fundamental first of the Copenhagen criteria, which is the political criteria for membership. So this is the main problem, I would say. Then we have other two problems, because Serbia remains isolated amongst the very few countries in Europe that did not introduce sanctions to the Putin's regime. Lately, President Vučić stated clearly that Serbia would not even align with the EU statement of the death of Alexei Navalny, failing to recognize what is clear to all of us, that the leader of the Free Russia was slowly murdered by President Putin and his regime. So, and now when pushed, even President Vučić recognizes that this alignment is necessary. We had the declaration of support for Ukraine in Tirana. Ambassador Hill was talking about the positive steps, but I think regardless of these small concessions, without Serbia's overall alignment with the EU's common foreign and security policy, and more importantly, without progress in the field of democracy and rule of law, here primarily we talk about fundamental reform of the electoral process and the liberalization of the media, we will not get a single euro cent from the 2 billion euros destined for Serbia within the EU's growth plan for the Western Balkan that Ambassador Joffre was talking. Tanya mentioned the upcoming DG Just report, the European Commission's report on the rule of law, that now candidate countries will be evaluated together with the EU member states there. Well, this report has been introduced primarily having in mind the declining democratic situation in some EU member states initially. But I think now there you have two segments, pluralism of media and checks and balances. I mean, come on, how on earth are we in a present situation going to fulfill this criteria? I would like to see this happen. I would like to see democratic elections upcoming. And finally, just to say something about that, because it's equally important, Serbian president and government needs to bravely assume the political responsibility for the steps taken in the process of the normalization of relations with Kosovo. Because it's somewhat strange that on the one hand you conclude the Ohrid agreement, and on the other hand you go on with a warmongering rhetoric, with instigating of vilest nationalistic propaganda in the media under your control, towards your first neighbors. I mean, this for me is a bit contradictory. This is certainly not how you build peace. And with this I will finish, but I think, to answer to your initial question, having in mind the situation as it is, I would be skeptical that unless something dramatically changes, we can make it under this current regime into the EU by 2030.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Surgeon. In fact, you kicked off the second round of what I had in mind on the panel, which is impediments, and he talked about these three impediments as the way he sees them to for the furthering of the integration and accession process. So Ambassador Geoffrey, what's your reaction to what Surgeon was saying?
Thank you. I think Surgeon pointed out the key issues that indeed we have to deal with. Closer. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm surrounded.
It was your innovation here, Geoffrey. It was your innovation to have two mics.
Okay. We need to work on all these issues, and also I would add economic reforms as another important issue, because economic reforms is important both in terms of increasing prosperity and competitiveness in the Serbian market for the Serbian companies, but it's also about empowering citizens, entrepreneurs, working on the rule of law, creating the conditions, more private investment, more transparent public procurement, transparent state aid. All these issues are also important. The governance of SOEs. These are economic issues that will certainly contribute to economic growth of Serbia, but also to its society more in general. The functioning of democratic institutions certainly is a key issue, because it's a core part of the path towards the European Union. Sir Jan mentioned the election issues. Certainly, the report of ODIHR highlighted that tangible progress and reforms are necessary to improve the election framework. So it's important that the recommendations of ODIHR, the current recommendation, past recommendation, are implemented, and certainly the government has indicated its desire to see this recommendation implemented. We'd like to see this happening as soon as possible, and it's important that these steps have been taken already. The overall issues of fundamental reforms, fight against corruption, fight against organized crime, entrenching the independence of the judiciary by implementing the justice reform, these are key issues. And certainly the normalization process remains relevant. It was relevant when we agreed the negotiating framework a few years back. Nothing has changed. We have now two more agreements. We have the past agreement that remain as relevant as they were and need to be fully implemented. And this is where we have to move. We have to move to implementation of this agreement. We have to deliver. We have to see progress. And then, of course, the foreign policy has become more central for all of us since the Russian aggression. It's undoubtedly that the relevance of foreign security policy in the European capitals, in Brussels, everywhere has gone up. We're facing a new reality, and therefore, of course, we would like to see all the candidate countries to be sincere candidates, sincere partners of the European Union in promoting our foreign policy objective. These require, of course, steps. This is the basket of issues we need to deal with. We will not be able to separate one from the other. It's part of a whole, and we need to be able to work on all of them, also recognizing the steps that have been taken, and indeed Serbia has taken steps, for example, to assist Ukraine. We've seen an important summit in Tirana last week with a number of commitments. We've seen humanitarian assistance that have been provided, and together with my colleagues we published an op-ed in Blitz this last Sunday highlighting all these aspects. But what is important here, and this is, we should not miss the whole, because we focus on the part. And to me the whole is that the EU and its member states have made a decision that in this new era of enlargement momentum, the Western Balkans must be on the train. The Western Balkans are part of our family, and even if we now look with different eyes to the east, we're not forgetting the Western Balkans, quite on the contrary. They're again part of the whole. So we need to understand and take factor in the way we decide and we advance this new geopolitical reality and sense of urgency we didn't have a couple of years ago.
I'll ask Minister Miščević Tanja to take the floor. Here's the floor to you.
Let me try with this one.
The question is, what is the major impediments to further thing? And if you want to react to any of the things that were said before, please do.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. That one does not work. This one is working. Okay, so 4 points, if I may. Again, let us be very clear. And please do not assess things according to the half of information. What does it mean aligning with the CFSP? Does anybody knows what entails CFSP? Are we talking only about the percentage, which means how many of the sanctions we introduce to Russia, or we are talking about other aspects? I'm sure that Srđan knows that CFSP goes way beyond, so common foreign security policy and defense policy of the European Union goes way beyond of not only important decisions in the international fora by the European Union member states. It goes to the fact that this is the only country that helps Ukraine with the electroenergy system. This is the only country which provided the electroenergy supply, and some of the companies sitting here with us. Please also acknowledge that, because this is what Ambassador Hill is speaking. Some things, it goes without saying, like, well, they did it, but they did not introduce sanctions. You don't know, but I am almost weekly, on weekly basis, in the contacts with my colleagues in Kiev. Why? Helping them to explain what does it mean to negotiate membership with the European Union. So this is CFSP. Let's talk about the dialogue with Pristina, not with Kosovo, but with Pristina. This is the official name of the dialogue, actually. The agreement on the license plates, the custom stamp, aren't those parts of the Ohrid agreement, if I'm not wrong? Well, were they implemented? So that means that the Ohrid agreement has started to be implemented. You know that I'm not an expert. That's why I'm asking to be sure. Well, on the other hand, you have the Community of Serbian Municipality not being implemented for how many years now? So this is when we are discussing the issues. I don't mind critiques, because critiques are the basis for us to work. But when you are criticizing, then be open and honest regarding those issues. One very important point. The rule of law mechanism for the European Union has not been introduced because they had a problem with the protection of the rule of law, but because they want to align. What does it mean? Rule of law, the way that secure the independent judiciary means differently because the measures are different in different member states. So I am proud that we finally can go and discuss together with the other member states about those issues. And first thing, audit recommendations. Let me again remind you all, and there are people here following very closely both the dialogue, the parliamentary dialogue that has been established. The audit is the institutional answer. So what we are seeking, and I think that we all have to seek, are the institutional answers to the questions. And I'm sure that Srđan and I, we can sit and discuss, not only us, and we are going to discuss that. That is what I wanted to announce on Wednesday, when the National Convention have the meeting, annual meeting, especially on those issues. But if you allow me just a few sentences on the growth plan, because this is something that we owe to our colleagues from the Foreign Investor Council, AmCham. What are the areas of accelerated integration? And that is the issues that the companies here are very much interested. So everything is about the convergence. But because the accession process for the Western Balkans is at least 2 times slower than for the Central Eastern Europe. And they reach the convergence using EU structural cohesion funds. We have to do something else. So that means that we have to use being smart, I have to say like this, and having an experience in the integration process and reaching the level of alignment already in several areas like SEPA, and I know that Amalia will be so happy when I say SEPA, because SEPA's Single European Payment Area is the first area of the accelerated integration, which we're supposed to reach until the end of the year. So that means the pressure is on us to align further with the criteria for the European Payment Council, if I'm not wrong. And the second thing are something that we all call green lanes, but it's much more than this. This is the enhanced custom cooperation. It's not only bilaterally with the region, but also with the European Union as such, not bilaterally with the EU member states. As we learn from SEPA, we can save $500 million per year only on one activity. This is remittance. I'm very bad with that word. Remittances. But the $500 million means some kilometers of those roads that can be built. So it's our own money. It's not money that will come. The money that's supposed to come is 2 plus 4, so 2 billion grants, 4 billion loans through the IFIs. And we are now, the EU is now in the process of adopting the so-called regulation on the growth facility, or the facility, financial facility for the growth plan. If I'm not wrong, only today the discussion on the regulation has started, including the European Parliament, because this is a co-decision procedure. So yes, there were decisions, there were resolutions, and the Parliament is the political body, consists of so many members of the different affiliations, which have a different standing point regarding the Western Balkans, enlargement, CFSP, and everything. But now, only now, we are going to follow the decision-making process for the adoption. Sorry if I was a little bit...
No, that's fine, that's fine. Please, Mr. Pontero, would you comment on what reforms, what do you see as impediments in terms of immediate economic reforms that should be done? Maybe that would be a good focus.
Perhaps instead of impediment, we should also talk about the huge opportunities that enlargement will bring both to the EU and the Western Balkans. But I'll park that one. And again, going back to the economic reforms, we discussed them this morning. But if you look at the lessons that come from those countries that have managed to converge with the high income of the EU 17, then there are a number of things that stand out. One thing is that they use a human capital better, as I mentioned in my first intervention, and here to bring it down to the specificity of Serbia, I think Serbia can still improve the labor force participation rates, especially for females, that is still below the average of new member states and the European Union. We saw also the Minister Mali said that unemployment came down significantly in the past 10 years, which is absolutely true, but again, when you look at youth unemployment, it's still quite high and higher than in the European Union. So the whole human capital sphere is super important. We also see that the convergence to high income have expanded their trade in a dramatic fashion, and here I hope that these elements that the EU is bringing forward, like the green lanes, the access to the single markets, will be fundamental to boost the trade as a percentage of GDP of Serbia. We spoke already about governance effectiveness and the gap that exists, so I will not go back there. There are other things. There is also, that was mentioned today by the IMF, the dynamism and innovation that small and medium enterprises bring. So here there is in Serbia still there is a big reform agenda that pertains to reducing the footprint of prominent SOEs in the economies. These SOEs capture a lot of market shares that should be left to the private sector. There is the business climate, which has improved. Foreign direct investment has come in, but we still see that domestic private investment is not forthcoming. Also, high-income convergers have lower levels of energy intensity. Of course, I'm sympathetic here sometimes with the Serbian authorities. It's difficult to do all of these things and also do the green transition at the same point. Some of the countries in the European Union are embarking now on green transition, having already transitioned to full market economy. So this is actually a complicated proposition. Of course, it's something that must be done, but sometimes we underestimate also the difficulties that this government face in facing these complex reforms at the same time. So there is a lot of stuff that Serbia can do. But going back to the benefit of enlargement, I think I'm not part of the Serbian government, I'm not part of the EU, but I'm heading the World Bank here. Obviously I'm implicated, but as a marginally external observer, I can say the benefits for both sides are huge, because on the European side you have huge geopolitical benefits. If you manage to integrate the Western Balkans, the market of the European Union will increase its size, so the firms and of the European Union can operate in this market. The old nearshoring proposition comes to life much quicker. This creates also jobs for European citizens. And at the same time, for the Western Balkans, getting into the EU, it will double your rate of growth. So I think, I truly hope that, that the issues that needs to be ironed out on the road of membership could be resolved for the mutual benefits of the party.
Thank you. Thank you. Ambassador, hear your thoughts on what you think are the major impediments for further enlargement.
I think Serbia needs to do a much better job of talking to its partners in the European Union and elsewhere about what it's trying to do, what the impediments are, what the difficulties are. But ultimately, Serbia needs to be much clearer on its desire to move forward. And I think there are people who believe that Serbia doesn't want to move forward. There are people who believe the EU doesn't want to move forward with Serbia. So there's a lot of mistrust. Usually the summation of mistrust is people don't want to take difficult measures. And I think it was a very important point that these things are not easy to do. And especially when the rewards are not always known. They're out there, but they're not necessarily assured. So, you're doing very difficult things which may be valuable for themselves, and I don't deny that for a minute. They could be valuable just for itself, but the major incentive for doing them is some reward in the form of EU membership, and you can't be assured of anything. So it's not easy, and but I really think Serbia needs to do a better job of making its case and doing so in a way that its aspirations are abundantly clear to the member states in the European Union.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Srđan, your reactions to this.
Yeah, thank you, Ivan. Talking about the impediments, I think we talked about three main obstacles when it comes to the perceptions, and I would say that their rule of law and democracy is probably the biggest one for alignment with common foreign and security policy. Normalization of relations with Kosovo is very important, but I think rule of law and democracy would present a much greater obstacle, because here ultimately we're talking about the survival of this regime. I think this is why I would be a bit skeptical to see fast progress. And we don't see it, you can talk, I personally don't see it as rewards. Nobody needs to reward me to have a democratic society. We had it from 2000 and 2012. We no longer have it. We fought for it for a very long time in the 90s. So I think this we don't need to be rewarded for. For the rest, we can talk about. And the main problem I see, the main impediment is, again, values. In democracies, I think it's natural to lose elections. You lose elections, you go to the opposition, you regroup, you rebuild your party, you come back to power. And I have a feeling that the ruling party in our country does not see things this way. For them, politics is a maximalist zero-sum game, and the only option, we heard the president, is to win and to stay in power. This is a very different understanding of politics and democracy than what I learned throughout my education, and I don't really see things this way, and I think most of us don't really. And I think fundamentally such understanding of politics lacks courage and statesmanship, because you, Serbia's and regional business community, know much better, talking about the alignment with the EU's common foreign security policy, that Serbia, isolated from the EU, would drown economically and politically. If asked among yourselves, the business community, to choose, and you did choose at the beginning, I believe, between chimeric dreams of Euro-Asian Union, BRICS, or I don't know what, and European integration, you would choose the first, in the latter, in the situation where 2/3 almost of Serbia's exports, just to name one fun fact, goes to the EU. So a different foreign policy course would be sheer madness. And the only reason why we have the current foreign policy course is in internal politics, because somebody doesn't want to lose votes to other right-wing parties and movements. And I think this is not good enough for a reason. You simply have to do have to make tough decisions, and then maybe you get punished by the electorate, but you know what? You get also punished because you created the climate from 2012 until today that the electorate sees things in a different way that does not really respect the geopolitical reality in which Serbia is finding itself. So I think this is what I would say is the main impediment, but yes, you would ask me to choose between the three, rule of law and democracy would be the one.
Okay. Thank you, Srđan. We have about 5 minutes left. I think this was sort of rounds up before. Maybe we can have one or two questions, but if you do, please identify yourself. Before that, let's do the survey again in one question. Of all of you, after this little panel, how many of you feel more optimistic about enlargement and the enlargement process than you did before this panel? Anybody? No, I don't. I think both the government and the European Commission have their work cut out for them, because I think there's a hell of a lot of skepticism still here. And I think this basically reflects a view of people who, as we noticed, are to 100% pro-European enlargement. So, questions, please, from the public. Just identify yourself. Vujović. I see you right. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you very much for a very informative discussion. I used to be part of this negotiation process a couple of years ago when the previous enlargement window was open, and then that one was closed. Good news is that the new one is open. And I think there's a sense of urgency coming from many parts of the world, people goodwill, saying this now is the time to renew this effort and try and overcome whatever issues we have. I'd like to hear a bit of a reaction. What is new in the negotiation process today as opposed to before? Earlier we used to have a clear list of things. In order to get into Harvard, you need to have 1,570 points before you can even apply. And that was for most of the things we were doing the economic side. Now it became more complex. Some people are saying there are things that need to be done before taking this further, and there are things that can be done later. And some of the issues on democracy and so forth perhaps can be done later as part of the EU, it will come in close. Mr. Ambassador was saying there are some good signs of cooperation and moving forward. Serbian political situation is complex. Let me just stay with one economic side, public procurement and external sources of financing. You know, in order to jump with a parachute to a new source of financing, you need to find a transition mechanism. And the negotiation has to offer this. What comes to mind is moving from positional bargaining to principal negotiations, from shooting from one side to the other to coming together and see what is the common set of things where we can find solutions. How can this be done?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Dusan. Since we've known each other for years, I've tolerated your long speech. Since I was best man at your wedding. Anybody else? Anybody else? Questions? No. I don't see you. Anybody? No? Are you raising your hand or what? No, that was somebody's taking a picture. Okay, maybe Ambassador Giuffre, maybe you can tackle this question in 2 minutes or less, because we have to close.
I think what is new now. I mean, the negotiating framework is what was agreed and has developed a few years ago. So you have what we call the fundamentals, that for which you need to close the interim benchmarks before you can close chapters, etc. But what is new now with the growth plan? I think this is very important, and I don't want this to be underestimated. We all understand that enlargement is a political process, and a political process requires consent, consensus, support. And we've seen, I'm sure that Tanja Miščević will agree, that one of the peak of support in Serbia for the EU was when Serbia reached an agreement on visa liberalization with the European Union. Because then citizens could see directly the benefit of the process, traveling to Austria, Sweden, Germany, without having to queue to a consulate. Very, very basic. And the idea now with the growth plan is precisely to provide some of the benefits of membership before membership, in order to, on one hand, be more convergent economically, but also to give the citizens a sense of belonging. The queues at the border of the trucks. I remember when I arrived in this country, I saw a video that Marco Chavez posted with all these trucks. I said, this is impossible. Then I drove myself home, and I did see that these trucks are there. So if we can manage to eliminate the queues of the trucks on the two sides, I think all the businessmen will see this is great. If we manage to eliminate the financial transition cost for the families that are sending their remittance from Austria to Serbia, paying a fee, or maybe finding other way to take this money, not to pay the fee that are complicated, they'll see the benefit. And with this, we can generate this type of consensus and restart the engine. This goes hand in hand with reforms. So we say this will happen, but you need to make a number of reforms, including in the fundamentals. So this is what is, in my view, what is really new in the negotiation. It's not the negotiating framework per se, but it's underpinning element that can boost the reforms and bring Serbia into the European Union.
Okay, thanks.
But I have to say, just one word. This is not negotiating membership. This is on top of it.
Okay, thanks. We are 0:00 time, so join me in thanking the panel. Thank you for coming.